Excellent. Well, welcome to our latest edition of BSL Talks, which is a series of webinars where we tackle some of the big issues in social and economic policy, research and practice. My name is Trav McLeod. My pronouns are he, him. I'm sitting here on Wurundjeri land in Naarm, Melbourne, wearing a white shirt, a maroon jacket, and I've got brown hair. And I'm Executive Director of the Brotherhood of St Laurence, or BSL. And it's terrific to have so many people joining us today for this discussion on building better systems and what transitions to Aboriginal community controlled organisations and Aboriginal led organisations are teaching us. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the lands and waterways we're all joining this conversation from today, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to First Nations people joining us today. We are incredibly fortunate to have three legends and respected First Nations leaders in Catherine Liddle, Rowena and Timmy Duggan, OAM, joining us as panellists, and I'll introduce them very shortly. First of all, some introductions and instructions to all of you about the webinar today. We're fortunate to have Georgia and Kelly as our Auslan interpreters, and we also have Sharon as our captioner, and I want to thank each of them for helping to make this webinar more accessible. And I know we're all looking forward to a great yarn and a lively discussion. There's been a huge amount of interest in this conversation today. I think well over 500 registrations for this webinar, and it'll be available on our website and recorded after the webinar is completed as well. If you would like to ask questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Closed captions are available by clicking on the CC button, which is again at the bottom right of your screen. And thank you to everyone who has submitted questions in advance. Quite a few questions have been submitted in advance. We'll try to get to as many as possible, as well as those that enter their questions live during this webinar as well. So turning now to the discussion. Yesterday, the Productivity Commission released the latest data on progress under the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. It showed that of the 19 targets, 1 has been met, 3 are on track to be met, including preschool enrolments, 5 are improving but not on track to be met, and 4 are worsening. And the release of the data reinforced just how vital the 4 priority reforms agreed with the Coalition of Peaks are to overall progress. And those priority reforms are sharing decision-making, building the community-controlled sector, transforming government organisations, and sharing access to local data. And much of that is what today's conversation is about. BSL has been working with First Nations organisations to deliver programs for many years now, and since late 2024, we've been actively growing the number of First Nations organisations who are involved in delivering a program called HIPPY, the Home Interaction Program for Parents and Youngsters, and also services that support financial inclusion and wellbeing. And the 3 organisations our panellists lead, SNAKE, which is the national non-government peak body in Australia, representing the safety, rights and wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, young people and families, and led brilliantly by Catherine Liddle. Hoops for Health, which is led by Timmy Duggan in the Northern Territory, and combines basketball with neuroscience to foster healthier lives. And Nunga Group Women's Aboriginal Community Corporation, based in Derby in the West Kimberley region of Western Australia, and led by Rowena. Each of those organisations and leaders have assisted and advised BSL on this journey. along with many First Nations community members, elders, leaders and advocates. Rowena, Timmy, Catherine and their organisations have very clearly articulated their aspirations for the future and have very generously educated BSL about the practice of sharing power, encouraging our teams to be patient during periods of uncertainty and to create more space for communities to lead decisions. And this approach and their guidance has challenged traditional power dynamics, and it has supported a shift towards self-determination, cultural authority and lived experience as the drivers of change. Despite those complexities, BSL has had the great privilege to explore what truth-telling, cultural responsiveness and self-determination really means in practice across different parts of Australia. We've observed decisions guided by community direction with elders, Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, community leaders using strengths-based narratives and how these foster genuine partnerships that are grounded in mutual accountability, trust and cultural integrity. And so with that background, we're delighted to have Catherine, Rowena and Timmy with us to share their thoughts on the importance of the transition of these programs and funding to Aboriginal community-controlled and Aboriginal-led organisations. And I'm just going to introduce the three of them briefly and then start asking some questions. So Catherine is an Aranda Laricha woman from Central Australia. As CEO of SNAKE, as I said, the peak body for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, Catherine has been a powerhouse working for policy and practice reform on the ground in communities and at the national level to improve the safety, wellbeing and development of children and to ensure that Australia's early childhood development system can learn from thousands of years of history of communities caring for children and for country. Catherine and I met several years ago now as part of the early childhood reform effort, and I've learned a huge amount from Catherine, and we're really fortunate to have her as the leader of SNAKE. Timmy Duggan, OAM, is a respected First Nations leader and the founder and CEO of Hoops for Health Australia. And for more than 30 years, Timmy has championed the health, wellbeing and empowerment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities through culturally grounded programs that combine sport, leadership, mentoring and financial wellbeing, the combination of basketball and neuroscience in a brilliant way. And his work is creating lasting social change and impact for thousands of young people, families and communities across Australia. He was recently named one of the 3 finalists for the prestigious NAIDOC Person of the Year award. I was fortunate to meet Timmy when he visited Melbourne and BSL a few years ago, and members of the BSL team met Timmy when he presented to the Financial Counselling of Australia conference in Perth many years ago. They sought him out, as I understand it, Timmy, during the break, including for advice and counsel, and the rest is history. And they've had some wonderful experiences and trips with you on country too. And Rowena Maura, Aboriginal leader from the West Kimberley region of Western Australia and the CEO of Nunga Group Women's Aboriginal Community Corporation. Again, more than 30 years of experience in the early years, community and economic development. Rowena leads programs that strengthen children, families, culture and community capability across Derby, in the West Kimberley of WA and the communities of Moanjum and Pandanus Park. Rowena is widely recognised for her leadership on community-led change, cross-sector collaboration and place-based initiatives, and serves on a number of Aboriginal boards supporting cultural revival, early years development, sacred site protection and economic opportunities for Aboriginal families. Rowena, wonderful to see you again and have all of you as part of today's conversation. So let's move to questions and in hearing from each of our panellists. Timmy, we'll start with you. Hoops for Health has been operating in the Northern Territory for 21 years, and the Hoops for Wealth program is being delivered within that. Could you tell us a little bit about how the program came about and what makes it different from other financial wellbeing programs?
Yeah, thanks, Trav. Firstly, thanks for the introductions. Yes, flattering. And I'd also like to acknowledge Catherine and Rowena on the amazing work that they do with our communities over a long time. Look, so people aren't confused, Hoops for Health is the organisation. Hoops for Wealth is our financial wellbeing program. And when people think of Hoops for Health, they tend to think of it's just basketball, but it is a lot more than that. We like to think of ourselves as a social and emotional wellbeing program based on Larrakia country up here in Darwin with touch points right across the NT and Australia as well. But yeah, our Hoops for Wealth started, as you mentioned. I was doing a presentation at the Financial Counsellors Australia conference a few years ago, and the Brotherhood of St. Laurence staff came up wanting to connect with an Aboriginal-led organisation to do some stuff in the Northern Territory. And at the time, we had done some work in Alice Springs Prison with the kids that had been in the Dondale Youth Detention Centre and had received some compensation. So they brought us in to do a little work, and they asked, can you do some stuff around their money as well? So we came up with the program Hoops for Wealth, and wealth being a bit more than just money, but wealth of knowledge. Our point of difference, so to speak, is the relatable context that is delivered in by our First Nations coaches. So I tend to say it a lot when we go into these places like the prisons and the youth detention. You can go in with your content or whatever you want, but if the content and the staffing and the organisation isn't relatable to our mob, that's step number one. So when you said some neuroscience, our stuff is based on a lot of evidence from Dr. Bruce Perry, he's leading childhood trauma expert, but grounded in our First Nations knowledges and lived experiences. And Dr. Bruce Perry mentions, and we use it when I talk about relationships, that we're kind of suffering with this relational poverty in the world that we're living in with the internet and the screens and all that. So relationships form a big part of what we call our model at Hoops for Health. We were lucky to connect with the Brotherhood of St. Laurence in terms we'll provide that cultural leadership and knowledge and know-how and touch points, whereas you guys at the Brotherhood of St. Laurence allowed us to navigate those systems, those government systems, which we were familiar with, but we didn't have the ins in there. So we're very acknowledging and thankful for that. In our session, what else sets us apart is it's done over 4 sessions, the actual Hoops for Wealth, and the finish line is close, meaning we'll have a little graduation for our participants who are coming from poverty, from low income, remote areas, but the end line is close. So we'll celebrate that achievement at the end after working in the rehabs in the prisons or wherever we do it in our remote communities. So from that, there was some research done by you guys, by the fantastic staff there, Dr. Dina, Lydia, Dan, and others, Julie and others there, Dr. Kaberi, over the 1 year to show our evidence and show our impact of having over 130 people participate in the program. And what they wanted was, look, to see some other First Nations faces delivering the program and having good touch points. And then we were able to use that neuroscience to regulate their brain and then actually deliver some good content, which showed out in the report. But there's a few things that kind of are our separators and our uniqueness. 2 things that stick out: First Nations led, good neuroscience to back it, and that relatable component there. Relationships are key.
Thanks, Timmy. And on that combination of the three, First Nations context, relatable, First Nations led, and adapting the sort of the science so that it's grounded in First Nations context and experiences. What have you seen about the benefits of that First Nations led approach and the difference it makes when it comes to then growing financial capability and resilience?
Yeah, I guess when the participants come in, we want them to feel safe environments, which our Aboriginal Community Control Health Services have done for many years. And we're just an offshoot of that as an organisation. But when they come in, we want them regulated. So that's that first part of the brain stem. So we want to try and get to the cortex, as Dr. Bruce Perry says, and they're able to reason with what we're saying. That doesn't happen on the first session, all right? But over the four, through our relationships, we're able to spread that power from the coaches. And I must say the sessions aren't lecture style. They're discussion style. So our mob can have a chance to have a say. And they know the issues. Our mob have got the answers already. So allowing them a safe space to talk about their money issues, and then they come up with the solutions. So we had a few participants have simply said, before this program, I did not know about this thing about the money, whether it was superannuation or tax or bank accounts or these simple things that people take for granted that, some people just didn't have the access to that information. So that's a big thing. There's just a calmness around it. But it's also, our model is based on movement. So we don't want this lecture style. We want people moving and not just sitting there for 2 hours. We've got a unique facility where we've got gym equipment and a basketball court, and that's where we embed that physical component. But we use a term called moderate stress, which gets you out of your comfort zone just a little to make that change. We don't want it underwhelming where there's no growth, or we don't want it overwhelming where our participants are going to go, see you later. We want that moderate stress to get that change and growth. And our coaches are really, really attuned to that through our relationships, coming from our own First Nations backgrounds and knowing these families on their journey to be able to do that.
Excellent. Thanks, Timmy. I mean, maybe if I may, before I go to Catherine, just that idea of basketball and sport as a connector and an entry point. My 7-year-old plays for a team called the Brunswick Magic, and it's the most exciting time of her week. Absolutely loves it. Say a little bit more about how that works in practice. You've just touched on it, but the idea of sport and movement as that connection and safe entry point.
Yeah, it's a model. Look, it's open to both male and female. We can do it inside or outside or wherever there's a basketball court. But there's a term that we use in our programs to actually get the healing, and it's called patterned, repetitive, rhythmic, moderate activity. And we know that it's based on our 60,000 years of actually doing that. Now, the science is just saying this, but we have actually been doing these patterns and rhythms and repetitions in a moderate way to get really good healing. And basketball just so happens to have these patterns and repetitions and rhythms, or lifting a weight, or boxing on the bag, which we have a boxing program as well. So these things can regulate the brain. So you're not just sitting, we're up and about. All right, now we're going to do a bit of learning and a bit of discussion. So you don't have to be a basketball person to participate. It's more around the brain and the social and emotional well-being. But there's good science, but even Dr. Bruce Perry mentions that he goes, First Nations people around the world had already been practicing this science without putting the labels on it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Timmy. We'll go to you, Catherine. Hello. So we know from what Timmy's just said, but also a lot of your advocacy and Snake's work, that First Nations-led programs have better outcomes for First Nations communities. And it would be great if you could just say a little bit for those listening, what cultural leadership and governance looks like and feels like in practice when it's done well on the ground.
What does it look like in practice? That one's easy. Our children thrive and they stand up and they're deadly and they know they're deadly and they're ready to enter their schools confident in who they are. That is the best measure of successful governance, Indigenous governance that we have. And we know that that's why our services were stood up. They were stood up because we recognised that we weren't getting the outcomes that we needed with mainstream services. We recognised that our families, for good reason, felt threatened or judged when they went into those services, were unable to communicate, again, for the reasons that Timmy articulated. Often those environments are unsafe for our mob, very unsafe for our mob. And again, history demonstrates why those things are. And if you go in feeling threatened, you got no chance of having a successful outcome. In our services, well, that's a whole nother story. You're just in there with mob who understand that you might have had a tough night, might have understood that there's been a problem with getting food into your community, understand that sometimes you just need a meal, sometimes you need to sit down and have a cup of tea. And as I was listening to Timmy, I was thinking about, again, the fact that our early childhood models are all built on grandmother's law. And grandmother's law, of course, innately being that if you love all children as though they are your own, if every child is fed and if every child knows who to go to get a hug, then your children will be well, which means your communities will be strong. A whole half of a law system. Those things are embedded not only into our approaches to early learning and child safety and well-being, but in any model of care that is stood up by Aboriginal people. There'll be nuances because each of our communities is different and how they're structured will be different. But at the end of the day, what is synonymous is they were built for our communities, by our communities, to serve our communities, and they are accountable to our communities, right? They stand up, and if you're not doing a good job, you know about it, and there are consequences for not being for not delivering. So. But the other thing I was thinking of as Timmy was speaking, and before he went into the neuroscience of it, was again when you grow up around those systems, and I was thinking of ceremony when our grandmothers would teach us how to dance. And if you got something wrong, they'd send you long way, long way, long way, long way. That was your punishment. And you'd have to dance back, repeat, 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 repeat. And that was your punishment. And it used to always make me laugh because while it was, you're trying to adapt your brain to all those movements and get your feet right and hit the right beat, or else they send you long ways again. You know what? It was more hard work for the grannies because we were having fun. And I think that's the other thing with Aboriginal community services. We also see the fun in really hard times, and we bring that out in our mob because we know that our ability to wrap each other up, our ability to see strength, our ability to see humor in some of the most horrific environments is what fundamentally makes us different. And an example of that would be, say, for example, where we have children in out-of-home care that might have been completely removed and have no contact with their children, where we've leaned in and said, listen, you've got to do this differently. At the very least, you've got to be able to access an Aboriginal medical service. That's the first time our children in those environments walk in and get an Aboriginal health worker that wraps them up. Hello, bub. I'm your auntie. I'm your auntie. And those children report that sometimes it's the only time they feel safe because someone saw who they were, talked to them the way they wanted to hear that ancestral tongue. And again, if I lean into something I've heard from one of our services really recently, it was that the job of the services is to cradle the child. The job of the workers is to cradle the child. The job of the services is to cradle the family. And at the heart of it, that's what makes Indigenous governance different.
Thank you. I know that Snake had been playing sort of a huge role in the transition of HIPPY to Aboriginal community controlled organisations, and you've really helped to guide that journey. It does seem that transitioning programs to First Nations organisations is getting momentum in the community, and I know Snake have supported the transfer of, something like 100 child and family services across the country.
Yep.
What needs to happen so that momentum is sustained?
Oh, you've got to keep your shoulder to the wheel and you've got to hold the line. So transferring Aboriginal services is very much a change management process. And in everyday life, we understand that change management starts with an ambition, and everyone's, yeah, a little bit okay with it, and you're going to drop. And it's going to be hard work to get back up to where you are. Also, what complicates that change management curve is that it's probably more like a sinus wave. And in that sinus wave, our communities are at different points. Some of them aren't ready. And some of that conversation gets confused when it becomes, well, the outcome when it becomes we've got to do this immediately. And when you're working with communities, some of this stuff is scary. It is really scary. Some of it not so scary. And you've got to be able to work alongside community to say, well, what is it you need right now? With the ultimate ambition being that once at a point we might get here, we might actually genuinely transfer this service to you. So you look for who's ready and where they're ready at, and you work with people on that journey. One of the burrs we hear often is, oh, community's not ready. We're like, oh, is that true? And it's often not true. It's that they weren't ready to have that part of the conversation yet. So that's a genuine keep your shoulder to the wheel, understand what it is. And again, one of those, I guess, a practical example might be when we're talking about transferring really tricky services like those that work in child protection. And we hook into things like delegated authority. So delegated authority at the end of the scale means that Aboriginal communities are making the decisions about where children are placed if they are at risk and how those children are managed. Now that's at the end of a huge scale. It starts with having a conversation with your family, and your family being able to make decisions about the pathway a child might follow. So again, if you apply that to the transfer of service delivery, it's very much the same thing because these things look after children. It's right now, where does the conversation need to start? It also needs to start with the things that people like yourself can do, Tav, in talking to other services and saying, you know what, this isn't so hard. It feels a little bit scary. All good and well, it's change management 101. But you've got to be brave enough to step into it. You've got to be honest enough to recognise that our mainstream services don't get the same results that children get when they're in Aboriginal community controlled services. You've got to be prepared to look at even the crunchy bits, like the money story, and understand that the dollars that follow Aboriginal children technically aren't there. They're not technically your dollars, they're dollars for Aboriginal children. Ideally, what you want is those dollars to be working in a different way, and getting the very best outcomes for Aboriginal children. So it's a long game, it's a wavy game, but it starts with a conversation to say, well, where are we at and how do we do this together?
Yeah, spot on. And a big part of that is changing ourselves to change the system. And even though that can be, scary for teams and for boards, if approached in the right way, it's undoubtedly leads to better outcomes. And the crunchiness of that journey, is something that requires some stamina and fortitude and really sort of trusting partnerships and relationships. Rowena, might bring you in. So Nunga has been operating in the Derby region for about 40 years, and I was fortunate to have some time with you and the team in Derby last year and saw, what makes the team so special and the work so special. I think it'd be great to hear that from your perspective and what your priorities have been as CEO.
Yeah, thank you, Trav, and thanks for the opportunity to participate on the webinar this morning. Morning for me, afternoon probably for the others. And again, I just pay my respects to the Laurence on where I come from and work in the Duggan and Wadawa people, but recognizing that we work with many different tribes that call Derby their home and have been a part of building these foundations, such as Nunga. Nunga is 38 now. We will be 40 in a couple of years. So big celebration for us of continuous service here in Derby and the regions that and community that call Derby their sort of area of home base, including Mount Jim, Pandanus Park, and the 4 communities along the Gibb River Road, Imingi, Kupangari, Dodnan, and Ngalaganda. Look, Nanga as an organization, why it's special is because it was built on the coming together of women, Aboriginal women that lived in Derby, came from many different tribes in the West Kimberley region, and because of the movement of families coming off stations and missions, found themselves in Derby, but didn't just sit here and allowed the circumstances to drive them. They set up organizations to be self-determined and drive who they are. And I look back at some of the historical documents where some of the signatures on the documents are of women that were from my tribe, the islands. And it's just so special to be a part of a legacy that was founded by these women leaders. Some of them have gone now, and some of them are still here. And some of them are of 4th generation women now as employees working in this organization, or their 5th, 6th generation of their children being a part of this organization. So that's what's so special about Nanga and the work we do here. We are in the lands of the Nigan and the Warawa people, but we work with a number of tribes. In Maunjum alone, there are the Naranjan, Wuror, and Wonombal families that we work with, and we respect who they are and what their language and culture and identity is so strong. We recognize that the Bari, Jawi people and Umade people and Ugarang people were the island peoples that have come off and fought this place. So very, very important that we recognize the different tribes and families we work with, because that is who shape Nanga as an organization, and with their families and their elders. Nanga, for us, what's also special is that it does offer this safe and welcoming space. One of the programs we're running here at the headquarters is what we call the Dagji Jandu Ubababanil. It's the Strong Women and Children's Program. That's where we've seen now women, like 3 generations of grandmother, mother, and child participate in the programs we're running here. It's a space of innovation where innovation is created by these women and creating and using their gifts and talents to be creative in understanding who they are and but also showcasing who they are. For example, in some of the work we're doing is what we call the story felt mats, and where the women are now and families are creating these felt mats for stories, with the aim to turn it into their own book for early years, and then into song, whether it's in Aboriginal English or in their language. And again, it talks about, we talk about repetition. The child's learning is repetition, routine and repetition. And so we're showcasing that in the products we're making. So for Nanga, this place is a place of belonging. It's a place of where we're an Aboriginal organization, so we get to say how things happen. And we work with the families, we listen to the families, we listen to the elders, and what they suggest to us around how we deliver, we go and we're able to do it. It's very different when you work in a government organization or a large NGO. There's a lot of red tapes that can stop you from participating and creating learning, for example, whereas here with Nanga, we can do on-country learning and take our families out. And that's where we see the success of people just in their elements, where they can shine and learn. And then whilst we may have the educators working, our families become our educators, because they start talking language and they tell their stories about what's important for them, whether it's the plant or the water or food. So there's a lot of learning that happens. And that's why Nanga is so special. It's special that it creates these livelihoods that may not happen in certain settings. So for us, we're committed to continuing to build that skill set with our staff that work with us, but also with the families we work with. And we've seen their confidence grow as families that walked in here, head down, or into our programs, and don't talk. And then by the following week, you see head up, they're conversing, they're leading. That's what's so special. You just see a different change in families that we work with. For Nanga, what's also special is that we create this place, and I'm so big on the importance of local Aboriginal women in the workforce and making sure that they're skilled and opportunities are given to them. So their career pathways are really, really crucial to the success of what we do and why this place is special. Nanga is known for upskilling. It's a stepping stone place, and for our women to come in and work. And if they choose to leave, we know we've been a part of their journey. We want them to stay, but we recognize this is a stepping stone place for our women that live here in Derby, Monjum, and Pandana. So our programs that we deliver in our remote communities, we employ locally. We don't go and, bring people from outside. Our first preference is that they are from the community, and they're supported by the women from town that may go in and work with them. So that's what's special about Nanga. You're muted, Trev.
Nice work, Rowena. Thank you. So you talked about the transformative power of Nanga and the work it's doing in community for community. Can you say a little bit about the importance of community designing the changes, in some of the services and the systems that you're part of, and how significant the new early learning and family centre in Derby will be? I know when I was there last year, you took me to, the site and the plans for that site, and how transformative it was going to be if it got up. And given the announcement in February, it'd be great to hear more about that.
Yeah, look, Nanga, like I said, it's been here for a while, and it's always had the vision of having its own early learning space. And that's been taken quite more seriously in the last 10 years, in a sense. I know that 8 years ago, the conversations were started with the NGOs to do the transition piece on the playgroups coming over back to the ACCO, and then HIPPY from Red Cross to here. And then my journey started with the organization 6 years ago, and where we started creating the program so that it was led by the community, for the community, and that for everything we did, we wanted to make sure that the local content was inside of every part of our delivery, which then also led to the importance of, but we need to have our own space, because we're working and we're partnering, and we're really good at partnering because we don't have our own space. We've not had our own space to deliver our services, and so that ambition that we started looking at was to look at, well, one, if we want to achieve the local workforce and women returning or first time coming into a workforce of whether it's early years or education in general or whatever field they choose, how are they going to do that if they don't have a place for their children to be cared for, nurtured, and be in a culturally safe place? So that led us on this journey on, well, we need to have our own daycare. So it's for our Aboriginal families, our Aboriginal children. The same time we were thinking about that, we were delivering playgroups and we were delivering HIPPY. And we were like, well, their programs are working with the families. So how does that look? If it's in a daycare? Then we looked at, well, it's more than just the daycare. It's early years learning hub for our families and children. So if there are families that are aspiring to return to work or join the workforce, they know that their children can go into a safe Aboriginal-led environment of what is commonly known as a daycare. And then for those families that aren't ready for that and choose not to be, they can be in the same facility, but in another area. And so you've seen our designs. It's the Ludgity design, it's the bulb nut design, similar to the Bayagawi in Fitzroy Crossing, the early years centre, where they have the whip ray. But for us, that the second Ludgity bulb nut would be the educational hub for our families to be supported in whether it's playgroup, HIPPY, visiting services such as health and educational, doing consults one-on-one, but women also continuing to thrive in their gifts and talents and building their leadership capacity. So that would happen in the other room. So for us, it's a once-in-a-generation lifetime investment for Derby. This is a big investment for Derby and the community. So we really thought this through. We worked really hard with community. We worked with services and even the services we're currently funded for to ensure that how our grants are worded, it's worded to ensure that it meets how we can actually deliver. Not just for the sake of a grant being written up. It's worded so that workforce development, fathers are included in the early learning, that it's holistic, not just focused on one part where child, mother, father. It's child, mother, father, auntie, carer, grandmother, grandfather, that holistic approach of how we value learning, a child's learning and upbringing. So the significance of us having the announcement in February this year just confirms the importance of early years learning in our community of Derby and the surrounding areas. It confirms the importance of workforce development for our Aboriginal women and working in and men working in the centre but being trained and qualified, so that we're not relying on a workforce that have to come from out of town. So that's the importance of it. It also confirms and support that we will have a purpose-built, culturally safe facility that will support the children in becoming school ready. And because, as we know that the investment into a child in the early years, once they get to kindy and into primary school, if we can get the early years right, we've set these families and children up to succeed when they get to school. We get that, we understand that, and that's our vision, to continue to work to ensure that our family are connected to the right services and support and learning, so that they can they are our future. They are our future right now, and they will be our leaders when their times come. So this is why it's so important that what this announcement, and once the facility is constructed and the doors are open, the work we're doing now in our shared spaces, our partner spaces, and under the tree, we do a lot of learning under the tree, by the river, down by the marsh. We'll have a purpose-built facility.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful news. It's brilliant news, Rowena. Catherine, I might come to you. We've had some questions submitted in advance, and I think one is really important, I think, for the whole group to hear your perspective on, which is, what do governments need to put in place to ensure that the transitioning of services to Aboriginal community organisations and Aboriginal-led organisations is done well, and what cultural governance structures have to be prioritised, to make that real? You're just on mute there, Catherine.
Awesome, thank you. So the priority reforms that you highlighted earlier on, Tav, they are fundamental to being able to do that, but you cannot do that if you do not have the structures right. So the shared decision components really start leaning into things like the ACCO funding model. Jump onto the Snake website. The ACCO funding model will be absolutely critical to the success of services, Aboriginal services in transitioning, because that funding model allows services like Nanga to respond to all of the characteristics that Rowena has so beautifully described. It says that our early learning services all need some level of base funding. It says that every one of those models needs to have consideration of remoteness and what the impacts of that remoteness might be on the service delivery, the maintenance of infrastructure, the ability to access training. It also says develop those training pathways so that families are able to identify what positions are required in a service in order to be able to make it be successful, and then support families to get better wraparound support in being able to enter career pathways, whether within a service or external to a service. So really quite advanced thinking in the ACCO funding model. If you've got any weight at all, look it up, push it, promote it and say it's time to get that moving. It's been under consideration now for more than 2 years. So that's one of the great failings of some of this incredible architecture is you can have the best model ready and ready to go. And the idea was that this would be ready by the time services like Nanga were up and running, but it's waiting 2 years for consideration. So governments need to move faster. They also need to be listening to the stories that are told by people like Timmy and Rowena, who are all saying there's a different way to do this. There really is, and we need to be looking differently at how we heal and differently at a different speed that says get in earlier, get in sooner, and genuinely invest in what it takes to have really strong children. But it'll start with the 4 priority reforms and getting the funding models right.
And Catherine, is that your reflection on the broader data released by the PC, Productivity Commission? I mean, wonderful that the preschool target has been met, but what are the lessons from that and kind of what that means for doubling down on the priority reforms?
Yeah, look, it's a tale of 2 stories, isn't it? So one says, and this is something we should all be high-fiving and leaning into as a form of celebration, the preschool target will be met. Now, that is just awesome because it shows that it's possible, and any Aboriginal person on the call will know this as a true story. Preschool wasn't available or accessible in any way, shape, or form to a significant number of our children for a very long time. Some of our regions are still having those issues, but it not only meant that the service didn't exist, but the ability to access the service wasn't there. So there was significant amount of work that needed to go on to help families get their children ready, to ensure that families were able to access that services and children would be able to attend. Now, that's a really good story. Those stories show that governments were willing to put dollars in the right spot, really ready to invest in what it took to be able to get children enrolled in preschool. What's a little bit tricky about those numbers is the newer targets, like the ones that lean in on early childhood development. They said there's a little bit of a problem in preschool enrolments. They were based on non-Indigenous data sets that were relevant and true. They say if you go to preschool, then the chances are you're going to finish high school and it'll be less likely to come into contact with any tertiary systems. You're going to get a job, you're going to go to uni, all of these things. However, when you take that out, it was actually the wrong data set to be leaning into. And in actual fact, our children needed to be developmentally ready. So where you see the story in the closing the gap statistics, where the story gets different is where it talks about devastating consequences. Now, the ones showing devastating consequences are the child and family domains. They're the socioeconomic domains. They're the things that relate to the number of people in prisons, the number of young people being detained, the number of people who are still self-harming, in particular young people in regional and remote areas, the number of children out of home care, all of those have a direct line to early education and care. And early education and care is the way it was described by Rowena, not childcare, but child development and child wellbeing. What it shows is we are still investing too late. So if you've got a voice, use it, invest early, invest in families and children and communities before they're in trouble. So it's a tale of two stories. Lean into the hope one. It can be done, but it means a genuine shift in the way governments are functioning.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Timmy, in terms of leaning into the hope story, the federal government recently announced a further investment in Hoops for Wealth, and it'd be great, to hear what you're planning next for Hoops for Wealth and what you think is needed to support longer-term economic self-determination.
Yeah, great question. What that investment did for us as an organisation, we're pretty small in the big scheme of things, but it allowed us to get out of survival mode, thinking about, 6 months, do we have to close the doors down, or where are we going to? It allowed us as an organisation to what we call regulate and breathe, and then open us up to be creative and innovative. It's over 2 years. We'd still like these contracts to be longer, to plan, but it allowed us that opportunity to breathe. So what it will do is consolidate our Hoops for Wealth program in Darwin and Alice Springs, and then also looking at some other touch points across the borders as well in the next year, in the second year. When you think of these whole systems and the freedoms that contracts and economic opportunities can provide, I always look at the broader system and look back at these pioneers before us, even, the visionaries, like the first people that started these Aboriginal community control health services. Where I had my first job, I went from Darwin to Sydney, and I was lucky enough that these people started the first Aboriginal community control health service in Australia, in the one in Redfern. So I did my traineeship there, where it gave me this insight into how community control health services work. People like, going back, Charlie Perkins, who navigated these government systems, like Catherine and Rowena, are doing now. But then, they talk about the kids, they talk about the grandmothers, who are my inspirations too, and role models and leaders. But the next iteration of Hoops for Wealth will be no different to what Catherine and Rowena are talking about, is a youth model. So, getting to know teachings around tax and super, bank accounts at the early age, and even going back further to mum's belly. In the womb is a beautiful place. Dr. Bruce Perry describes it, where we got these patterns and repetitions and rhythms, of mum's heartbeat. So creating that space from that 0 to 5 age group is so important to give us the best start, and they determine, these things for later on in life. So that early resilience, I'll call it, knowing the whys and hows of money and how to avoid, getting into crisis. But that's, we call it Hoops for Wealth. So it's building that wealth mindset, not just for money, but that wealth of knowledge, utilizing history to propel. So the term that we use is post-traumatic wisdom, using that things that have happened in the past that may not have been so good, that have held us down in these traumatic experiences, but using it to propel us, because it created resilience amongst our mob, to go forward and learn from it. So I'd recommend a Hoops for Wealth youth iteration going forward.
Excellent. Rowena, I'm interested in your experience. HIPPY's obviously been transitioned to the Nunga group, and interested in what you've seen for children, families, and local workforce, and how that links into your broader vision for the community in Derby, Pandanus Park, and Moanjum. But more broadly than that, what's your advice for other organisations in the sector BSL in terms of how we can continue that momentum. You caught the mute. I started it, so I'm sorry.
Yes, started it. Yeah, no, look, thank you for that. And for those on the webinar, so Nanga was the HIPPY program was transferred across to Nanga back in 2021. And I think Catherine said it earlier. It's a management change that's required, and it's a thinking of coming from a model that. So when we got the transition, we also received the staff that were there, and they came with a mindset that they had come from a large organization, and there were systems and ways of how business was done. So when the team came over, there was a lot of learnings that they had to do, we had to do, so that everyone was clear about, whilst you've come over with an understanding of how HIPPY was delivered by this organization, you're now coming into an Aboriginal organization. We have a bit of different approach to the way we would see the delivery of the program. So that was one part of the work we had to do. We also saw that was quite a hard job to do, and we saw some turnovers. And we worked very hard in trying to retain the team to deliver the service. When I became the CEO, though, I looked at this program in more depth, and I went back to BSL and I said, look, this model is not working for us. Is there opportunity to change it? Because otherwise, we're quite happy to hand this back. We're not going to deliver something that's not working for us. And so we worked very closely with the HIPPY supervisor and the team leader to look at the model, and because we could see we weren't hitting the targets. Our families weren't engaging. The tutors we had and the coordinators weren't hitting the targets. And we was like, okay, this is not, I don't know what it is, if it's to do with your model or our approach. Once we got to speaking to the heads of BSL, we were able to then have confidence in driving what the delivery would look like. We then got the right people in. We now have a coordinator. She's not Indigenous to Australia, but she's an Indigenous woman from her country. And we have 2 local mature age women that work for us. One of the things I just want to make mention is that what's part of the HIPPY agreement is that the tutors would turn over every couple of years, and the tutors would be selected from the family cohort. And we saw that whilst we're wanting to empower the families to become tutors, we needed to have continuity for the families. And therefore, one of our tutors that had exhausted her 2 years, we negotiated that she stays on. And with that, we've seen the success in the program. So for BSL, listening to our model of approach, we've seen the success in retention and families really engaging in the HIPPY program. So, I get an update from the coordinator. We've had consistent growing numbers. We've had retention where we've not lost a family this year and last year. So we've seen 3- and 4-year-old families go all the way. And we've seen the success of those children walking, and those mothers walking into a school setting and have the confidence to speak to the teacher about their child's learning and education.
Yeah.
And so there's just so much pluses with the way listening to the organization, the recipient, in our case, Nanga, around what a model could look like, and letting us go with trial and error.
Yeah. Thanks, Rowena, and thanks for your honesty there and all of the feedback. That's unfortunately all we will have time for in this BSL Talks, but on that last question, there will be a discussion paper coming out very soon from BSL and from SNAKE on some of the lessons learned from the transition of HIPPY to Aboriginal community organisations and First Nations organisations. So please keep an eye out for that. I want to thank all of the panellists. So Timmy, Catherine, Rowena, I could listen to you all day. Thank you for sharing your stories and your advice and expertise with everyone who's listening. And to everyone who's joined us today, I wrote down a few words as I was listening around safety, around cultural leadership, cultural history, rhythm and repetition, and the idea of this being a muscle and something that needs to be exercised, sometimes imperfectly, and that it's a team sport. But if we do it well, as Catherine said, there are much better outcomes, and that's evident in what is seen in communities and what we see with kids, families as they grow into older age. There will be a recording of this session available on the BSL website in the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that, and please share it with others when you see it. And for those interested, you can subscribe to the next BSL Talks via our website. It's a really important part of the work that we do, and partnerships are a core part of what we are about. And I just want to thank Timmy, Catherine, Rowena, your organisations for walking together and for the lessons that we've learned from your guidance along the way. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day and week, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Trev. Thanks, everyone.